When you create a project in Document360, by default, the address of your project is a Document360 subdomain. However, you may prefer to keep your domain name at different providers for branding and trust purposes. You can map a subdomain of your own domain to the default Document360 project address. Document360 provides two approaches to brand your knowledge-based site as per your brand guidelines. You can use either custom domain mapping or subfolder hosting, and which one you choose will depend on your business needs. First, let's look at custom domain mapping, which you would use if you want to compartmentalize your website to establish specific content types that are distinct from your root domain. You can also use custom domain mapping if you want to separate search traffic to your knowledge-based site from your root domain. In Document360, settings for both custom domain mapping and subfolder hosting can be found under the knowledge-based site settings and custom domain. To demonstrate how you can configure custom domain mapping, let's say we have a website which is connected to our Document360 knowledge-based project. By default, our URL to the documentation on our website would look like this. Back in Document360, let's configure a custom domain mapping. The first step is to add the appropriate prefix to our domain name. Next, we'll need to add a CNAME and TXT record, which will need to be performed on your domain hosting service. Let's add the CNAME record by selecting CNAME as a type, copying the host to name, copying the answer to target, and the time to live, and click Add Record. Do the same for the TXT record by adding it as a type, the host to name, the answer to TXT value, and the time to live, and click Add Record. In Document360, let's verify and save this mapping, and it will run through a configuration and verification, and once the SSL provisioning is complete, your documentation site will show up with your new branded URL. Now let's move on to subfolder hosting, which is used primarily for search engine optimization. Unlike custom domain mapping, this strategy concentrates your keywords into a single domain, which results in better root domain authority and thereby better search rankings and more engagement. In order to configure subfolder hosting, you'll need a web server to host your documentation site. For our example, we're going to be using an 𝐿 server. For an in-depth guide to set up an 𝐿 server, please visit the Document360 documentation. You can access the scripts needed to set up your Document360 documentation over a subfolder. Let's look at our domain name. The configuration for the 𝐿 server will be performed here in this interface. So here, we're using the following server name, and for the sitemap generation, you'll need to add your sitemap to the first line and your project name URL to the second line. There are many other settings you can configure from this interface, which you can learn about in the documentation site. Once the configuration is complete, you'll need to restart the 𝐿 server for the changes to take effect. Now in Document360, let's enable subfolder hosting. Next, we'll add the subfolder path and click Update. Now on our website, if we go to this URL, we'll see the proper site load up. In summary, by utilizing these two powerful methods in Document360 to map your existing documentation to your website brand will help you build trust with your customers while also improving engagement and your SEO rankings.